Robin.
Sorry.
Great. Okay. All right. This is the May 16, 2023 meeting of the City of Charleston Board of Zoning Appeals Zoning. Present here today are John Bennett, Chappie McKay, Bill Goodwin, Robin Richards, and me, your chair, Jeff Tibbles. Present from the zoning staff here today are Lee Batchelder, Penny Ashby, and Allison Craig, and from the planning staff, Omar Muhammad. These proceedings are being recorded, and we ask that those who speak please identify yourself for the record. We will conduct this meeting in the usual fashion. We will first receive information from city staff about the application and the city's recommendation. If the recommendation is favorable and no one objects to the application, the matter is uncontested. The Board of Zoning Appeals usually, but not always, approves uncontested applications. For all applications, the board reserves the right to ask questions of the staff, applicant, or others in attendance prior to rendering a decision. If, however, the city recommends against the application, or if there is opposition to the application, we treat the application as contested and hear from the applicant and anyone else who is in favor of the application. Next, we hear from anyone opposed, followed by a short rebuttal from the applicant. We then close the public hearing portion of the meeting for that particular application and open discussion to the Board of Zoning Appeals members only. We will then make a decision to approve with conditions, or deny the application. The Board of Zoning Appeals Zoning has the authority to do three things. Number one, hear appeals to decisions of the zoning administrator. Number two, grant special exceptions, a fact-finding function of the board. And number three, grant variances to the zoning ordinance if the application meets the hardship test outlined in section 54-924 of the ordinance. The board may deliberate and make a final decision on a matter by majority vote of members present at the hearing and qualified to vote. However, an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the board members present and voting shall be required before a use variance can be granted. For a variance to be granted, the Board of Zoning Appeals must make the following findings. A, that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. B, these conditions do not generally apply to other property in the vicinity. C, because of these conditions, the application of the ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property. And D, the authorization of a variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or to the public good, and the character of the district will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. Pursuant to our ordinance, if you are to speak tonight, I have to put you under oath. So anybody who plans to speak, please raise your right hand. I'll ask you, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You'll signify by saying, I do.
I do.
Thank you. We don't have any deferrals other than item A2, which we'll have to defer due to a lack of quorum, but we will, thanks to Mrs. Richards' arrival here, we'll be able to go with A1, review of minutes and deferred applications from previously advertised BZA-Z agendas. Number one, review of the minutes of the April 18, 2023 meeting. In attendance at that meeting and here tonight are Ms. Richards, Mr. McKay, Mr. Bennett, and me. We do have the minutes in the agenda packet, so if I have a motion. Move to approve by Mr. Bennett. Mr. McKay seconds. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. Mr. Goodwin is recused because he was not in attendance, and now we're skipping over A2 because we don't have a quorum for the approval of the minutes from the May 2nd, 2023 meeting, and that puts us at item A3. 193, 195, 197 Jackson Street, East Side, TMS number 459-05-01-047, zoned LB, requesting approval from section 54-317 to amend the conditions of the BZA-Z approval on May 7th, 2019, that prohibits a restaurant use in 193 and 199 Jackson Street and the yards behind these buildings, to permit one food truck to be stored and operate behind 193 Jackson Street, as shown on the site plan, with no increase in restaurant patron use area. The owner is Mount Vernon Partners LLC, Cameron Laws. The applicant is Kevin Hartdorfer. Mr. Batchelder.
This application concerns properties on Jackson Street, just east of Meeting Street, and shown here on this zoning map. So it's this collection of buildings right here on the south side of Jackson Street, half a block off Meeting Street. And you'll notice on this map that there are these properties. It's one lot with 4 buildings on it, and it is zoned limited business. And it's right on the edge of a neighborhood. So to the east, you have lots of residential properties and a church immediately next door. Those properties are zoned residentially, and that's signified by the, or indicated by the brown coloring on the zoning map. And then the other properties across Jackson Street, adjacent to this property on the Meeting Street side, are commercially zoned properties. Housing Authority has its office on the north side of Jackson Street, and a large surface parking lot behind that building. And then immediately to the south is an apartment building at 530 Meeting Street. Back in 2019, the Board of Zoning Appeals heard a request to allow these buildings to be renovated into commercial uses, a variety of commercial uses, with the 2 center buildings being restaurant uses, or allowed to be restaurant uses, with the space immediately behind those buildings also allowed to be used for restaurant uses. But the outer buildings were not allowed to have that type of use, and the spaces behind those buildings were not allowed to have that use. And this is the state of this is what the buildings pretty much looked like in 2019 when they came before the board. These 4 homes had sat on Jackson Street in this dilapidated condition for many years, and the owner was not doing anything to repair them, stabilize them, or anything. So they were in poor condition. Or investor came along, was willing to buy the properties and restore them. It needed some relief from the board, mainly for parking, because there is no real off-street parking associated with these property. And so that was the reason for the request in front of the board. The uses themselves are allowed by the limited business zoning category. It's just the fact that there was not adequate parking that brought that request before the board back in 2019. So this is what they look like today. The first building closest to Meeting Street is on the right. You don't see the facade, but then the other 3, which are the subject of this application before you tonight, are shown in this photograph. So the first 2 buildings, this building right here, I'm moving my cursor over it, and this building next to it, those 2 buildings have the restaurant use that is allowed, and the space behind those buildings allows the restaurant outdoor patron area. This building on the far left is the one that's closest to the neighborhood. It is not allowed to have a restaurant use. And the space behind it, which is the deepest portion of the property, where there's a substantial amount of yard behind it, that is not allowed to be used for any restaurant use either. So that is the request that's before you tonight, is to amend the conditions placed back in 2019 it did not allow any restaurant activity behind what is 193 Jackson Street. Here's an aerial view. You get a better sense of the character of the property and the space that does exist behind these houses. So these two, like I said, these two have the outdoor patron area that is permitted by that 2019 approval. Zoning map. Information about zoning. So here's the existing conditions. So 195 and 197 Jackson Street, as I said, have an approval to have a restaurant use, and they have been used for that type of use. And then there's a space behind those buildings that is also permitted to be outdoor patron area for the restaurants. 193 Jackson Street, shown here, has a large yard behind it. It is not permitted to have any kind of restaurant use, storage, nothing connected to the restaurants can be back there. What they're asking your approval for is to amend the conditions for 2019 to permit them to park a food truck in this location back behind 193 Jackson Street. The food truck would be stored there, number one, but it also would be in use and serve as a kitchen for the restaurant behind 195 and 197 Jackson Street. There would not be any patron area connecting the food truck to this space back here. Patrons would not be allowed to approach the food truck. It would be simply a kitchen that would be used in connection with the restaurant uses behind 197 and 195 Jackson Street. So that's the request that's before you. Provided more information here, more diagrams that are hard to read, but essentially they want to build a bar back here, which actually reduces the patron area behind 197 Jackson Street. And that's fine, that's allowed, there's no issue there. There are plans that are going through a separate permitting process right now. And I'm not sure what this one shows, but skip ahead. Indicate that there's no change in the interior or exterior patron areas for these existing restaurant uses. Drawings. So right now, the restaurant use that's there, which is called Tobin's Market, it closed for a while. It's been closed for a while, but it will be reopening at some point. That use is allowed under the limited business zoning to operate until 11 p.m. So you can't, the hours of operation cannot go beyond 11 p.m. But prior to 11 p.m., they're allowed to operate, they're allowed to do things back there that can generate noise. And there are no conditions that restrict that activity. What the applicant is proposing is a set of conditions that would apply to 193, 95, and 197 Jackson Street that would limit the noise activities behind these buildings in exchange for the approval to park that food truck back there and allow them to have additional restaurant kitchen space. So the conditions are, as I've stated here, no amplified sound above normal conversational levels and no drums. They could have live music, but no drums. And that condition would apply Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then Thursday, they're requesting a condition that allows them to operate until 10 p.m. with music. After that, no amplified sound above normal conversational levels and no live music. And that condition would apply Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And then Sunday, the music stops at 8 p.m. The same conditions after that as apply Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So those conditions would restrict the activities that go on in the restaurant above and beyond what they're allowed to do now, which is just operate until 11 p.m., no restrictions on what they do with ways generating activities, live music, amplified sound, that sort of thing. And so they've been talking to neighbors, and including the church. I don't think we have anything in writing from the church one way or the other, but they can tell you about their conversations with those folks. So there have been some other neighbors who are not in support of this, and I think they've been talking to those neighbors, seeing if they can't resolve their concerns. I'm not sure where that stands, but this is what they are requesting your approval for, is the just parking that food truck back there to allow them more restaurant kitchen space. And in exchange, they would agree to these conditions that would attach to 193, 95, and 97 Jackson Street. So it seems like a fair trade-off, but the people who live immediately in that area are the ones who have to make that decision. And I know there's been a lot of conversations, and there was in the public comment packet that went out, there were a lot of comments about that. So I'll just leave it at that. It seems like the neighbors are not opposed to this set of conditions. I think it seems to be a win-win to get some restrictions on things that happen at the restaurant, outdoor, and exchange for allowing them to have that food truck back there. So it seems like a win-win situation, but perhaps there are concerns still that this is not restrictive enough. So I would say that that I'm generally in support of the idea of trying to come up with a solution that does help the neighbors by restricting noise generating activities behind the restaurant. So if that can be achieved, that's great.
So we have a recommendation of approval from the city with the conditions that have been outlined here. Do we have anyone tonight in opposition to the application for 193, 195, and 197 Jackson Street? If you are here in opposition, please raise your hand. And seeing none in opposition, do we have the owner or applicant here?
I'm sorry, we're here to represent the neighborhood. Opposition might be a strong word.
Okay. Well, we'll give you an opportunity to speak in just a moment. Is the owner or applicant here? Anything you'd like to say to the board?
Not at the moment. Thank you, Lee, for presenting the conditions. And I agree with Lee that we want to make this, Cameron Gauze with Mount Partners owner. We would like to make the approval subject to the neighbors' acceptance of the conditions presented by them.
Okay. So anybody else here in support of the application? Right, ma'am, we'll hear from you. Please come on up and state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Emily Cox at 74 Lee Street. I'm a homeowner and I've been there for 15 years. We've seen the east side rapidly gentrify and undergo rampant development over the last several years, which has come with both positives and negatives for the neighborhood. As many of our neighbors are members of underserved communities who historically lack a voice, we're especially concerned about how new additions to the neighborhood will negatively affect quality of life. In its previous incarnation, Tobin's Market was not a good neighbor. As an interiors architect, I was really thrilled to see the cottages on Jackson Street revitalized and restored. However, it was quickly apparent that the original variances granted by the board for use of the buildings were perhaps not, maybe they were bent in its original incarnation. And many neighbors felt that we were subjected to a little bit of a bait and switch in the business operation. For well over a year, all of our windows would shake with the volume of the amplified music multiple times a week. And weekly calls to the business and to the non-emergency line, the livability police department, when Tobin's was open, led to really ineffective efforts to hold them accountable. So my neighbors and myself took off multiple days of work to try to go to municipal court and ensure that they would be held accountable so that we could get our quality of life recovered in the neighborhood. That being said, I'd really like to thank Cameron for reaching out yesterday after my comments were submitted and for acknowledging that and for taking responsibility for the fact that the business was not operated in a way that benefited the neighborhood initially. And he really took time to talk with me in depth regarding his plan to ensure that the new version of Tobin's would be a positive addition to the community. With the addition of Bar Rollins, the Palace Hotel, and the rooftop bar at the Moxie, parking and noise has become even more of an issue for our neighborhood. It's a really hot topic, and we're all very sensitive about it. So I'd love to support a successful business at Tobin's that positively contributes to the neighborhood. The history of the site shows that we, the residents, need something that is enforceable without having to rely on livability to address noise complaints. And so I would ask the board to formally include the days and times presented as a condition of waiving the original variance conditions, because my concern is not just for the current use of the space, but also for the future as the business changes hands.
Hi, everybody. I'm Laura Hassenfuss, and I live at 204 Nassau Street. I'd like to reiterate what Emily said. I also submitted comments to the board in opposition originally, but I had the opportunity to speak with Cameron and Ken yesterday evening. We spent 30 minutes going through concerns. They answered all of my questions. And I also would like to see this business succeed, but I would like to see those conditions that we have talked about today be put into writing. And I have been on the east side for 8 years now. I actually purchased my house from a neighbor, Aaron Pope, who also has been in communication with the board and with the owners. And again, we just want to be sure that the neighborhood is going to be protected and that our voices are going to be heard. And again, we don't want to block this project, but we do want to make sure that the conditions are going to be followed. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Anyone else in opposition? Anyone else wants to speak on this issue? All right, Mr. Glaus, anything in response?
Nothing further. Thank you.
All right, any discussion, any questions for the applicant for the city?
I have one question. Have you heard anything back from the church next door?
Yeah, my partner, Ken Skidmore, he's a partner owner of the property and business. I'll let him speak to it. He meets with the church every Sunday, actually, after their services. Their numbers are extremely few. I'm talking like maybe a handful of parishioners on Sunday. And they seem generally in support. We haven't obtained any written support from them, but you know, they've at least verbally told us they support it and do not oppose it. If my partner can add anything to that, I'll let.
Yes, so as I said, I'm on site most of the time, and I've had attended their church services a few times. They find it extremely welcoming congregation. Deacon Williams basically told me they have a meeting with the deacons every 30 days, and he didn't have my phone number, and and I was on the property whenever I'd given him the original package, and they weren't able to compete before. Been told by them that they don't disapprove of it, and in fact, as a part of this, we're gonna be doing, that property line right that separates are the only space where there is not a fence line. And the only issue that we have, had as far as, for both properties, we're gonna build a very nice fence for them. We're gonna trim back some trees and clean up. It's doing some really bad damage to their HVAC unit and ours as well. So I've spoken at length with them about that and shoring up some of the stuff. They're extremely nice people, but as Cameron said, there's not a lot of recently, and just getting them all together. Electronic is not the easiest form of communication, but
Appreciate you saying that. The only reason I ask is because when the property across the street came out before us, they were pretty vocal about the parking needs and that kind of thing. So I'm just surprised that they had it intended for this one. We're just hoping to make sure we got their input.
yeah, so they were the first conversation that happened. And like I said, I talked to them multiple times a month anyway. So and going forward, it will be a benefit for both to shore the property line and it's just giant.
All right, further discussion, questions?
I just had one question about the use of the food truck. So essentially, it's a kitchen only. I mean, so you would have wait staff that would be going back and forth.
Precisely, back
So
of the house staff would be actually delivering the food to patrons. The buildings, when we renovated them, they were subject to, the renovations were subject to conditions by the state SHPO and the National Park Service for, it was a tax credit renovations. And those are still enforceable. And we actually cannot build a proper commercial kitchen with the whole commercial code in the works inside of the structures. It's not allowed. So this is a way of us actually improving ourselves as a more equipped restaurant without having to modify the buildings themselves. And you are correct, it's only back of house staff that would have access to the food truck.
We work directly with DHEC on this. It's actually the commissary, which is a requirement of a food truck, is the front room, which is in stainless steel space, but we're just not allowed to have it kind of like cooking. Is service from a food truck is completely legal as long as you're moving it into another building and then serving it from there. So whether the person walks up and gets the food or the food is brought to them, those are both at the same act as far as.
I don't know if I missed this in Lee's presentation, but then what is the use of 199?
199 is actually the one furthest to the west, the one that's not here. That's this office right now. 193 is the one furthest to the east directly.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking.
That's currently tenanted by a barbershop and hairstylist called Circle Barber. They're a long-term commercial tenant.
They were actually the entire building. There's one small room in the back, which is an office space, but those areas are not going to be used. Just trailer and the surrounding setbacks that are required.
Thank you.
What's currently in the back of is that 195, the smallest building?
197.
197? What's in the rear of that?
That's a porch extending from the building. They're all elevated foundations. That's a piazza, if you will, that wraps around in an L shape around the building at the floor height of the floor, about 2.5 feet over.
You use the rear of that for social or food?
The open space in the back is the primary outdoor courtyard for the restaurant space. So where that whole area is will be tables, outdoor dining, and an outdoor, as Lee indicated before, an outdoor bar along the south, near to the south property line. 7 to 8 feet off the south property.
And just for clarity, there's no serving from the food truck, is that right?
No, that would be employees of the restaurant running food, delivering from the food truck. The food truck is essentially acting as a kitchen building, a mobile outdoor kitchen building, which is sort of the interesting, unique circumstance we're kind of forced into operating to, if we want to operate this, kind of restaurant in these unique structures that are still governed and restricted by federal or restrictions.
Would the food truck be running, is it running while you're cooking?
Well, it's a food trailer, so there's not actually an engine running on this thing. It's powered like most mobile food trucks or food trailers, powered by large commercial propane tanks that are about 3 feet attached to the back of these trucks.
It makes noise though, is it making noise?
Actually not, no. We attach it to shore power, much the way you would if you docked a boat at a slip. We can actually run it off our interior power of one of the commercial structures. So we wouldn't need to roar a generator, for example. So,
That would not happen, is what you're saying.
no, we would not need to.
And the propane actually only runs the flat top and the two eyes of the stove. Electric runs a ventilation system that is quieter than an air conditioner.
I would be a lot more comfortable if we had some conversation with the church. Since you got a great relationship with them, we can get some sort of communication saying that they have a problem with it since you're neighboring the line.
If other members feel the same, then Chair would entertain a motion to defer.
I'll make a motion to defer.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
All right, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Goodwin has moved to defer. Mr. Bennett has seconded the motion. All in favor of a deferral of this item, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None are opposed. Thank you. We appreciate your efforts to work with the community. If you could please provide some communication, some assurance to our board members that the church has no opposition to your request, I think you would find your path easier.
Can I ask for one clarification?
Sure.
If the deferral could be left to staff approval with the support from the church has been requested.
I'm not sure that that's permissible. Mr. Batchelder, have you ever anything like that? No. I think we'll have to see you in either 2 or 4 weeks. We'll try to make it as painless for you as possible if you've got support of the church.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, the next item on our agenda is the new applications, number 1, North Market Street, Church Street, Anson Street, and Pinckney Street, TMS number 458-05-03-005 and 458-05-03-017, requesting a third 1-year extension of a vested right that expires on April 16, 2023, pursuant to section 54-962. The vested right pertains to a special exception granted under section 54-220 on April 16, 2019 for a 115-unit accommodations use in a GBA, General Business Accommodations Zone District. The owner is SCM, Charleston Market Investors LLC. The applicant is Capers G. Barr III. Mr. Batchelder.
This is a request to extend vested right to this hotel. This is the location, surface parking lot today that is just north Market Street between Church and Hanson Street, and shown in this aerial view. Back in 2019, we're granted approval for accommodations use. This location that has been extended once, and so this is twice it's been extended. So this is the third one-year extension of that vested right, and there have not been any changes, amendments to the zoning ordinance that would preclude them from obtaining that extension. So we recommend that this be approved.
All right, anyone here in opposition to the application to extend the vested rights? All right, Mr. Barr, anything you'd like to say?
No, Mr. Chairman and members, I believe the approval is a matter of course.
Yes, thank you. Any questions, discussion? Do I hear a motion? All right, Ms. Richards moves to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Bennett seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes. The extension is granted unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Barr.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Next item on our agenda is B2, 968 Ashley Avenue, Wagner Terrace, TMS number 463-11-01-029, zoned SR2, requesting a special exception under section 54-110 to allow a one-story pool house and raised pool terrace additions that extends a non-conforming 5.1 foot rear setback. 25 feet are required. Owners are John and Jackie Adams. The applicant is John Douglas Tucker, architect. Mr. Batchelder.
This is a residential property in Wagner Terrace. It's a large lot. You can see that the house shown here in this aerial view sits all the way on one side of the property, leaving a large side yard. And it's that large side yard that they'd like to take advantage of with an addition. So and the property immediately behind it, I'll just point out, is 101 Darlington. So see a letter from them in this presentation. But applicant's materials are shown here. There's a very good with the existing conditions. Photographs of the house. This garage would come down, and large yard. Same board maps, views, survey, and plan. So this is the existing condition, and this is the proposed. So what they're doing, they have a terrace here. This patio is a raised terrace, and then what they would like to do is extend that terrace over and include this one-story building. This location shown here, and a pool. So it's the extension of the 5.1 foot rear setback of the existing house that we're dealing with tonight. So this is a special exception to extend that non-conforming rear setback horizontally, manner shown here. And of course, the issue is a special exception, whether there will be adverse impacts on neighboring properties, light and air impacts, that sort of thing. And here's a elevation just showing the limited size of that proposed building. The terrace is 2.5 feet above the ground, so not very tall. And more views. Existing on the bottom, proposed on the top. And then the property to the rear view on the top of this image, their back property line. That property owner is 101 Darlington Avenue, Polkey's, Sylvia Polkey, and they indicated in this letter that they were asking the board to approve this. They have no objections to it. So I think the application satisfies the special exception requirement for extending that non-conforming rear setback. And, my recommendation is for approval.
All right, thank you, Lee. Is there anyone here in opposition to the application for 968 Ashley Avenue? If you're here in opposition, please raise your hand. All right, I see no one in opposition. Do we have the owner or applicant here? All right, sir, is there anything you'd like to say to the board?
No.
Questions for Lee, questions for the city, questions for the applicant? Ready to go? All right, Mr. McKay moves to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Goodwin seconds. All in favor, please. None are opposed. So the motion passes unanimously. The special exception is granted for 968 Ashley Avenue. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is B3, 17 Orange Street. Charleston, PMS number 457-12-04-116, zoned SR4, requesting a variance from section 54-301 to allow a 1.5-story addition, garage, conditioned storage to an existing carriage house having a 7.7-foot south side setback. 9 feet are required. The owner is 117 SOB Property LLC. The applicant is Simmons Young Architect. Mr. Batchel.
17 Orange Street is a residential property, and shown here on the zoning map, it sits behind 117 Broad Street or 115 Broad. I'm not sure which address that goes by, but that for a number of years now has been the Governor's House Inn, which was an accommodations use that was approved, I think in around 2000, right around that time, when it was converted from a single-family home into an inn, and it operated that way until just recently when the property was sold. The new owners have actually taken it back to a residential use, so it is now returned to its original residential use. The inn is no more, and but the property is comprised of 2 lots of record. There's the Broad Street property, and then there's this lot on Orange Street. It contains an accessory building that was used as part of the inn, but it is a separate dwelling. What the applicant is requesting your approval for is a very slight setback variance to allow construction of a garage that would attach to that accessory building and be encroaching slightly into the setback off of that rear property line, or in this case, the side property line of 17 Orange. So this aerial image shows the Broad Street house, the historic home, the existing parking area and driveway area behind the house that was used for the inn. And that area is accessed off Broad Street. There's a wall along Orange Street, historic wall, very old, that does not have any openings in it to allow access from that parking area to Orange Street. And then you see the accessory building right here. And then you see the house immediately to the south on Orange Street right here and further south, there are other homes as well. And then homes across the street, across Orange Street as well. So that is the existing condition. So the applicant has submitted their application and made their argument for their variance. One thing that I'll point out as I go through this is that they adjusted their request slightly. So here's the existing site plan, accessory building right here. And here is their proposed site plan for that part of the property. So they've adjusted their plan slightly so that they eliminate the encroachment into the setback, the 9-foot setback off the south, off that side property line. But do encroach 1 foot 3.5 inches at the rear corner of that building. So the request is to allow this addition to the accessory building with this very slight encroachment into the 9-foot setback that is required off of that property line. That is all that's being requested tonight. There's nothing on the board's agenda with regard to the wall. That's really not an issue for the board. That issue would have to go before the BAR and be approved by the BAR if they were going to alter that wall at all. And the only issue is the setback issue. And I think a lot of the comments that we received, public comments that were received, were talking a lot about access to Orange Street, the impacts that would have, and I understand those impacts from dealing with the property years ago when it was converted to an inn. So, so I understand that, but the applicant is requesting this variance, and in exchange for the variance, they would agree to limit the height of the building, the new building, this garage building that they're proposing to build, to the height that is shown. As I go through these plans, you'll see what that is. But the building itself sits in a 3-story height zone, so conceivably it could be 3 stories. And the zoning requirements, of course, it would still need to go through the BAR and be approved by the BAR, but the height district for this area does allow a 3-story building. So these are just more plans showing the proposal. It's a garage on the first floor. Space, conditioned living space or storage up above. These are the plans, elevations showing the proposal. So this is the side that would face Broad Street house on the property. There would not be any windows, as I understand the plans, there would not be any windows or dormers on the back side. So you see here, there's no opening shown in the wall here, and there are no dormers on the back side. So this would be the side facing the neighbor on Orange Street. So it's a 1.5-story building, and the eave height is about 12 feet, I believe. And they would agree to conditions that would restrict the height of that building to the height shown here on these plans. I understand we've received a lot of feedback, and there are concerns about the impact that this building would have on the neighbor's home to the south. And so I just would suggest that maybe, and perhaps they're not aware of the condition that the applicant would offer encroachment, but perhaps that might be a a worthy trade-off for a very slight encroachment into the setback on that side. And these are photographs that the applicant has submitted. But this is a drawing that shows the house to the south, that north wall. And we do have windows that are shown in these locations. I think there are 4 windows total, 2 in the back, maybe 5 windows. Here, and then there's a window here and a window here, according to this drawing. And this is something that the applicant has provided for your consideration. But my recommendation would be that if we're so inclined, that I think it's a worthy trade-off to allow very slight encroachment in exchange for limiting the height of this building, as shown on the plans. And again, the encroachment is 1 foot 3.5 inches at the back corner of that building, and then it tapers as you move towards Orange Street to no encroachment.
All right, thank you, Lee. Before we get started on this one,
And let me just add one more.
Please.
I'm sorry. Let me just add one more thing that I forgot to point out. But the other thing, I'll go back to the drawing here that shows the property line. So the other thing that is important to point out is that the property line is not at a right angle to the west property line or Orange Street. And you see that accessory building, it is parallel to that eastern property line. However, the property line along that separates this property from the Orange Street property to the south is slightly skew. And if you're building an addition onto the accessory building and trying to keep the angles appropriate, end up with this slight encroachment because of that angled property line. So
Must have been reading my mind, because that's what I was thinking. Why do they need the 12-inch setback variance? It's for angles?
right, that property line, for whatever reason, that separates the 2 Orange Street properties is not
Irregular.
90 degrees
Slopes.
to the street.
Okay, who's here in opposition to the application for 17 Orange Street? Just raise your hand, please, so I can get a show of hands. All right. So we've got the owner or applicant here, I assume. Mr. Young.
Great. I'm just going to talk for 1 second on Simmons Young, 133 Main Street. I want to talk, I'm here on behalf of my clients down Rosenberg and Nina Rumbaugh. I just want to talk through the architecture for a second, and then Mr. Hellman's going to talk through the variance test for number 2. The building is influenced by the existing historic kitchen house. We're trying to be deferential to it in height. We're also taking up only a small 26% of the lot instead of 35%. And then we're trying to show as much of the kitchen house as we can by moving it to the south. And then we're using this sort of design influence of the carriage house for the garage, condition storage above, so that it's in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. One other thing is that there is shown on this drawing a 129 square foot wood stair on the left-hand side that encroaches into the existing setback, and we would be demolishing that, and then in return, the 30 square foot encroachment is what the building has. Also, of course, encroachment goes. And I think that's all I'll say at the moment, unless you'll have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. Hellman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Hellman, 105 Broad Street, on behalf of this application.
Simmons walked through the architecture, and I was gonna walk through the test, as to the extraordinary and exceptional conditions that exist. There are a number of them. Obviously, we've got a historic structure that's located at the rear of the property, as opposed to what you typically see on Orange Street, where they're all located right along the front. This one is tucked to the back. The subject parcel, as Mr. Batchelder pointed out, is odd shaped. It narrows and is slightly trapezoidal in shape as you move away from Orange. To square off to Orange and not have a building that effectively blocks the historic structure has a slight encroachment of about 1 foot 3 inches. There's also this Dominion energy transformer up here, so it starts to affect the buildable area. That transformer for Dominion is actually important for all of Orange Street. The prior owner of the property granted an easement for that transformer so that all of the power lines on Orange Street could be removed, increasing the parking area on Orange Street. It's very tight Orange, and those cars have to park up on the sidewalk. So when those power poles came down, it created more spaces, but it impacts buildable area. It's not affecting this development, but it would affect other uses and affects the buildable area of the property. There's also a large live oak that's up here. You don't see it on this drawing, but it impacts what would be a typical buildable area in that you can't build up against the street. So everything here is pushed back. None of these conditions were created by the current owner. Unlike other nearby properties, we have the built improvements, as I mentioned. Most of the properties are more rectangular than this one is. They're not burdened by a transformer, and most of them were built before or cut down trees, and so oak trees don't impact their buildable area like this one. It's an off-site oak tree, but its root structure is tremendous. We believe these extraordinary and exceptional conditions unreasonably restrict the utilization for the reasons I mentioned. The effective buildable area, the tapering of the property at the back, it would push this new structure and block the historic structure from the street, the oak tree, and effectively this tapering that creates this problem. We think that the variance would not be a substantial detriment to the adjacent property or to the public for a couple reasons. First, to the public good, by keeping the new structure as close as possible to the property line, tying right here to the actual setback, it still gives the public a view of what people come to Charleston and see, a historic structure. So if we're trying to keep as much of that visible as possible, if we look at the tapering, that tapering actually increases the area to the south where 15 Orange is. 15 Orange is unusual in that historically Charleston homes did not have north-facing windows. There was the concept of north side manners. So most of the old houses just had a window on the stairwell. Here we have a house that has 2.5 stories of windows that face north. Very unusual. It's a newer house. Historic homes, very rare to have that. But you can see that the distance between the two houses remains the same, even though the property lines do. So it's a situation in which the distance that the setbacks would have caused remains. In fact, it's greater. They're about 5 feet away. So the setback remains, or the distance that the setback would require remain across both properties. Lastly, as Mr. Young pointed out, this stairwell, which you don't see right here, which is about 130 feet of square feet of an encroachment being removed for a small 30 square foot light encroachment. So I think for those reasons, we would respectfully request that the board consider supporting this application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hellman. Is there anyone else who is here in support of the application for 17 Orange Street?
I do believe that he couldn't appear, but he sent a
letter to Mr. Batchelder, the neighbor at 119 Broad sent a letter in support of it today.
Thank you. Mr. Young, before we get into the opposition, I have a question for you. What would prevent you from simply designing the accessory building to adjust, 1 foot 3 inches further towards the middle of your lot there?
So the main thing, excuse me, that we're trying to do, this is actually a non-historic portion that sort of goes out from the original kitchen house. We're just trying to stay as close as we can there. And with that in mind, we took that 9-foot setback and then
And if the variance were denied, there's nothing, Lee, to prevent them from making that design adjustment and moving it 1 foot 3 inch, so that they're outside the setback, and then they can build whatever they want without the height limitation that they've agreed to as part of this variance.
Right.
Did I say that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So who's here in opposition? Come on up. Please state your name and address for the record, sir.
We also put the survey.
Name is Martin Alloy. I live at 15 Orange Street. My wife is not here tonight, but she's also participating with this because of the aggravation that this presents. So, a little survey that shows the other house, the mansion.
Oh,
Go back a couple. The one that says that this is not adjacent and not in scope. Here's the mansion. That's the Rutledge house. That's the one that has a plaque on the front from the Preservation Historical, the U.S. Negative Historical Preservation Stone. And also, there's another plaque that the Preservation Commission also put on the front of the house. It has this house, what they're referring to. We have a company called SOB. I'm not sure what SOB stands for. I have one kind could probably be South Abroad, but it's a crazy name to use for the name. So what they're doing is trying to separate one property that's historical preservation and build a 3-car garage 21 feet tall. Is that a story and a half? Not sure I would consider that a story and a half, 21 feet. The upstairs is 10 feet. That's not a story and a half either. Anyway, my house, as when it was designed, was looking at the historic property with these beautiful gardens. They're not being maintained now, but with the freeze we had last winter, most of the perennial flowers and stuff are dying. We have to replace it with their planting and construction. What they're, for some reason, trying to do is separate lot 17 from the historical house, including the kitchen house. I don't know why. It would seem to me if I were to build a 3-car garage, I would attach it to the back of the house, but that's not in the scope of what we're talking about tonight, but they could really attach it any place. Also, the size of the house, of the garage, 46 feet wide. Now, the architect here, I don't know anything about them, but from looking at the plans and their analysis of what they've done, I see so many errors, it makes me, I don't quite understand. Most of the technical qualifications to build a garage, you're generally 20 to 24 feet for a 2-car garage, and a 3-car garage is 30 to 33 feet. That allows Most cars today are no more than 7 feet wide. That allows 3 to 3.5 feet between each car that can be up to 7 feet. Don't really need a 46-foot long garage with what would be a potential bedroom for a future discussions on the top, because the interior is 10 feet tall. So the plans always say it's 1.5 stories, whatever that means. But on one of their other pages, you'll see a drawing that gives you the dimensions. So I don't know if your staff looked at that, but I think it'll be part of what you look at. So what we look at now is, I have a beautiful view of my house. Here we have windows. 1, 2, 3. These 2 are in our kitchen. Our kitchen is oriented to look at the house. They're big windows, 38 by 70. And they're above the wall. So you see everything in your next door neighbor. Now they're going to build a 21-foot tall building that's blank. And the whole beauty of our house is totally destroyed by the lack of view. So these 2 are our kitchen. This is our dining room. It's also the most pleasant view of looking at the mansion in the garden. So all of a sudden, you're separating lot 17 from the rest of their site. Then they're coming in with a garage on that site. And I'm assuming that the cars from the garage need a place to ingress and egress. Logic would say they should use Broad Street, but when they did a BZA site plan hearing, they didn't connect the 2 parcels, and there's a separation between the 2 parcels. So what they're saying is there's no access, but they're going to build a 3-car garage. Doesn't make sense to me. The questions are, I wrote a pretty detailed letter. You won't have it in your record. And in my letter, I went through each of the architect's specifications, line by line, and explained what I think are improper. I'm surprised no one paid any attention to me. We live next door. Line 3, the authorization will not be a substantial detriment to adjacent property. Adjacent property, no one talked to me until this thing was already filed. And I bought my house because we're next to a historic property that they properly assumed would not be built upon. I can understand minor adjustments to the mansion, but I would never dream that my views would be blocked by 3-car garage, 46 feet long, 21 feet high. They got if you look at that survey at the beginning, there's plenty of property there they can put the garage any place they want. It's not necessary that they block my views. I'm retired. I was planning to live in this house for a long time, and I was depending on, this is a historic district, South of Clark. Nothing. I have more experience than these guys do in building houses. I've probably built in my life, where my company has almost houses, high quality houses on the East Coast of the United States. I founded a company, we're the 20th largest builder in the country. Some idea about architecture and what people like in houses. And to me, this beautiful view that we have sold me on buying this property in Charleston so I could retire and enjoy my life and now SOB is rooting it. And I just don't understand. The basic question is, what can they be allowed to do when you have a mansion and a cookhouse? Is this going to development? I don't think it's one piece of property. I don't think that's not the question before you today, but what is the roof that they're trying to do for future development? Our garage, does it really belong where they put it? I'm sure. Would you like your garage next to your house? Seems to me that's what most people, and I would say the majority of people, whenever we build houses and we separate the garage from the house, unless it's impossible to get to the house, people don't like it because you gotta carry your groceries to the house. They don't have servants and that kind of thing. That's why they put the room on top of the garage for the servants, which would be another application later on. I can't attest to that, but you know how things happen sometimes.
Mr. Alloy, could you please try to wrap things up? We've got
Well,
some others to
yes
speak.
and no. You know, this is a life and death decision to my wife and myself when we want to retire. All of a sudden, they come in here with this monstrous garage with a room on top that's larger than it has to be, lacking what the reason we bought the property in the first place, because we thought. And there has to be some justification, unless you all are going to go back to the US government and tell them to take down their plaques and that it's no longer a historical site. The garage will now be converted to a townhouse, a freestanding townhouse. I don't know, there's no rules about this kind of stuff. But it would just seem to me that south of Broad, here you have a mansion, a cookhouse, it's historical, it's 160 years, 260 years old. And now they're changing the whole character of it. We can have some minor changes in character. They're making a big deal of removing a fire escape that was put in when the bed and breakfast was there. I mean, that's no big deal, but why a huge garage, and you're trying to separate the lot from the mansion? Yeah, I just don't understand that. All the comments.
Mr. Alloy, I'll give you 30 more seconds.
Well, I appreciate the 30 more seconds, but there's a lot of sensitivity here. If you read my letter, point by point, I pointed out exactly why this gentleman's comments and his lawyer's comments are pretty gross and inaccurate. So it's not a 1.5-story building. It's a 21-foot tall building. It's ruining the whole historical nature of the mansion and the kitchen house. And a 1-foot setback, so somebody can get a view from Orange Street with a 6.5-foot wall they can't see over. That's preposterous to me. And there's pictures in the file showing you what we see. I mean, it's a beautiful situation. And I think it's disgusting that it should even come up.
Thank you, Mr.
And I
Alloy.
think the responsibilities the board had, do we keep the character of the historic district? Do we keep the character of the historic house? If no, then you can vote for it. The answer is that you're responsible and want to think about how people lived in Charleston and south of Broad Street. It's a historical district. I, as a citizen, what am I supposed to rely on if I can't rely on you guys to protect me and other people who live in the south of Broad historic district? Sorry if it weren't pretty simple.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else here in opposition to the application? State your name and address for the record, sir.
Hi, John Dursey, I live at 8 and 10 Orange Street. My wife, Ashley, and I have been on the street for about 3 years. We've been in Charleston for 10. I too want to voice my objections to the variance request. And I'm just gonna make one point, maybe briefly, that is simply alternatives. This is a large property. There are alternatives. The encroachment, I do not understand. The opportunity for a private garden, and it is a private and wonderful garden, no doubt, are vast. There are several. And I think that granting this is something that I can understand. It operated very successfully as a hotel for many years, and lots of coming and going, lots of activity. I just believe there's a plan. There's a plan. It's just maybe not. So I would also just make one comment is I think the reason why there is so much focus on the wall, in addition to asking that this variance not be granted, is that we all know where this is going. The real creativity here has been not so much in thinking differently about the plan, but in differently about how we present it. And I guarantee we'll be back soon defending the wall. So my comments tonight, again, limiting them strictly to the variance at hand, but voicing strong objections.
Thank you very much, sir. Anyone else in opposition? Yes, ma'am. Please come up and state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Adelaide Bennett. I am the owner with my husband of number 16 Orange Street, just across the street. Edward and I both oppose this variance for the following reasons. The requirements for a variance, you very succinctly stated earlier, are that there be an unnecessary hardship if the board makes 4 findings. Extraordinary and exceptional condition, that secondly does not apply to other properties, and denial of such variance would thirdly unreasonably restrict the utilization. I don't have to tell you this, but just in my mind. And fourthly, the granting of the variance will not be a detriment to the adjacent property. We feel that this application fails on all 4 points. The petition is for a garage and additional conditioned space. Very few Charleston properties actually have garages. The owners knew that there was no garage when they bought the property, and there was no extraordinary hardship in not having a garage. The lack of a garage applies to most properties in the neighborhood. There is no unreasonable restriction to the utilization of the property by not having a garage. Finally, the request for more conditioned space seems grossly unnecessary. According to Zillow, the property has 9,887 square feet of built-out space right now. Since this is no longer a commercial property, it is difficult to imagine a need for additional living or storage space here. Others have talked about the wall, and I won't go too far into that, but it does concern us because it seems to be a creeping variance strategy. Eventually, once it's open, then they would be asking for more spaces to be removed from parking so that there would be easier ingress and egress from the property. So I'm just making a brief mention of that because it's difficult on that street with horse carriages increasing, it's very narrow, parking is difficult. So in closing, I'd just like to say that for generations, Charleston properties all up and down Meeting, Legree, East Battery, and many, many other streets have provided easements through the main property to their dependencies, even when they're sold off. If the BZA provides a variance based on an imagined hardship of the property, not having a garage and being limited to a mere 10,000 square feet of built-out space, you will be allowing for the erosion of the zoning ordinance, which is supposed to help preserve the integrity of our built environment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else here to speak in opposition? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mike McLaughlin. I live with my wife Sigrid, sitting over there, at 14 Orange Street since 2001. We're here to support Marty and Darius Alloy and the 15 others who submitted letters or have spoken tonight in opposition to this variance request at 17 Orange. I'd also just quickly like to acknowledge the other people on Orange Street that are here but not speaking. Jeff Tent representing the Bolts and Lang and Howard at 102 Trad, Jeanette Cooper, Alex Macon, with Sigrid, Stephen Adelaide, Emma Johnson, Becky and Bill, everybody else has been accounted for. We all feel very strongly about this for a lot of reasons that have already been stated, so I'll try not to go over the same thing. As I think some of you already know, Orange Street, originally called Orange Garden Park, had an outdoor conference facility, and a street was actually added in 1767. So we're talking old Charleston here, outside the west wall of downtown Charleston at the time. Very small, very narrow, frequently signaled out for its charm and fragile appeal. There are 15 properties on Orange Street now, and another 4 at the corners of Trad and Broad. All of these people use that thoroughway for either work, school, small children, whatever, and other activities. So it's a very close, tight street. I would like to make just a couple of comments up front, just to draw a distinction. We live directly across from the Eloys, 15, they're at 15, we're at 14. In 21 years, I think I've seen the dependency house, which is now being called the kitchen house, maybe a handful of times, and every time from Broad Street. You cannot see that from Orange Street. You have to be on an elevated position. The second thing I would like to, with respect to Mr. Batchelder, if you took an aerial view of Orange Street, I don't know any property that has perfect right angle lot lines. Our own at 14 goes like this. So it's not unique, but their situation is not unique. I think nearly all of the properties nearby have equal to or worse constraints to deal with than 17 Orange, believe me. Example that's already been given, no garages at all. In some cases, no off-street parking, let alone a three-car garage. I would just go through a couple of points to add emphasis to points that have already been made. One, there is no hardship there. They have everything they need. They have plenty of space. They have access now through a horizontal property range serving 117 Broad. We do not see where the problem is. The only hardship could be if they choose to want to sell the property separately and there's no access other than that thing. Hence the concern about the wall. And we're not without, it's not within your purview, but we're not without history here. They've already filed BAR appeals for breach that wall by initially 10 feet, now 20 feet. And they've already had a BAR approval of a site plan that has shown access to this lot cut off. So clearly we're concerned about that. But let's go back to the merits. I'd like just to focus briefly on 2 points made in the applicant's letter. The transformer. This transformer was negotiated in 2012 with 17 Broad, this property. The easement they granted was not for the benefit of Orange Street, it's for the benefit of themselves. They had lines going into their property. They get their power from there. To their advantage and their guests at the time to have those lines submerged. To single out Broad Street as the only beneficiary of that is not accurate. I checked with Dominion Energy just yesterday, and they reconfirmed that the easement goes with the land, notwithstanding what was said in the applicant's letter about 117 Broad not having any responsibility for that easement. It goes with the land, and clearly, if the transformer blows up, they will be without power just like the rest of us. So that's an important piece, and I don't see how that constrains their buildability and as well as the oak tree. The only reason that's a problem, and in a prior iteration of his applicant's letter, April 17th, he actually used the word access as a constraint. So we know where this is leading, and that's why I think the variance has been requested so they can manipulate through that that area. Finally, the garage itself, Adelaide already mentioned this, but the pipe stem driveway concept is all over Charleston. And just nearby, 117 Broad, for example, 50 LeGree, 11 Orange, 11 properties on Meeting Street and Church Street alone between South Battery and Broad Streets. So it's not unique to them. And by the way, Dominion Energy told me there were hundreds of these transformers throughout the Charleston area, usually hidden by a wall or vegetation of some sort. So to say that they are somehow unique by only having this is just not true. So I will wrap up essentially by saying that we respectfully ask you to deny this variance for 17 Orange. We believe that Orange Street remains a passageway, as Alice Ravenel U.T. Smith once said, with narrow sidewalks, narrow roadway, and quaint pretty walk on the west side of the street under a long brick wall, now stucco, overhung with flowers and shrubs. Extensive garden behind it. We want to keep that character in this district, and we beseech you not to grant this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else here to speak in opposition? We got a couple people. No. Yes, ma'am. Please take your name and address for the record.
Erin Minnigan with the Preservation Society of Charleston, 147 King Street. The Preservation Society of Charleston supports the neighbors' concerns over this proposal, and we oppose the variance request. Specifically, we do not find the application proves unnecessary hardship under the variance test. This property does not possess exceptional conditions that would prohibit its reasonable utilization, and the authorization of a variance for an addition of this scale would cause detriment to the character of this property and the district. So we urge the board to deny the variance, to allow the owners and project team to pursue a more reasonable program for the property, working with the neighbors and key community stakeholders to come up with a more appropriate solution. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Leesman.
Ellis Leesman, 418 King Street, and formerly of 2.5 Orange Street. I represent Marty and Sarah Savoy, and am here to ask for you to deny this request for a variance. I go back just a little variance that we saw for Ashley Avenue. One aspect of that was it just was going to continue an existing encroachment. Another aspect of it is that it was not viewed to create obstructions or interference with view or with light, like this one would definitely create. And this one is not continuing an existing encroachment. And third, that the neighbor that would be most affected by that variance wrote and signed a letter in support of it. So clearly, that's a different application. It's decided on its own facts. But look just at tonight's meeting. Look at one of the variance requests that came up and the rationale that could be presented for it, and this request. You also heard from the community. Everyone has already been identified for the record. There's a room full of folks here that oppose this request. Now, this body has one choice to make. You aren't deciding about the wall, like we said, and you aren't deciding other things. But you also aren't being asked to make a false choice. The fact that this applicant might agree not to build a 3-story garage, is there even such a thing that isn't a parking garage? And that would certainly be within the BAR's purview to handle. They don't want a 3-story garage. And what's more, even if they were going to offer that condition, that meets no element of the hardship test. There's no 5th element that says, well, if they make a deal or if they offer something that otherwise could have some benefit, and certainly a 21-foot building is not as bad as one that's 40 feet. But the hardship test is not met by a gimme, and especially a false gimme at that, because a 3-story garage is essentially unthinkable. So I'd like to provide you a little bit of context, Lee, if you might help with those two photos that I had sent before. Again, this one has been shown earlier. This is 15 Orange in the view of its northern wall. And then Lee, if you could show the next photograph. And so this is the existing view out of 15 Orange Street, again, as you've heard from Marty. And thank you, Mr. Tibble's chairman, for his extra time and for just understanding how important this is to him. And so this is the current view, which of course would be completely blocked, because I want you to ask you to picture a third image where there's a 46-foot brick face. I don't have that picture because that doesn't exist now. This is the existing condition. That third image is what it would look like. Okay. It'll be up to the BAR about what building gets built where. But what I can tell this group is I believe when you look at it and you understand your purview, there's no hardship here. There's no necessity to build this building in the setback. Just as Ms. Minigan mentioned, there needs to be a better plan. They already tried to reduce the setback somewhat, but there simply is no aspect of the hardship test that's met. First, they have to show exceptional and extraordinary conditions. There's none. In fact, this area, all this open area out here goes to show you how much they have to work with that other properties wouldn't have. This garage could be located in a number of places. Why is it right now crammed up against my clients in terms of the proposal? Because that's where the applicant wants to put it. But their preference is not a hardship. So there aren't any extraordinary exceptional conditions. The transformer, again, was invited by the prior owner, and the current owner stands in their shoes. And it doesn't prevent an appropriately sized building or for it to be located in another more appropriate spot. The second prong of the test is not met, showing that there are somehow extraordinary or exceptional conditions. Again, there's open space. There's plenty of places to put an appropriate building. The idea that it's being located where they are asking you to be able to put it, because that's going to save the view. Well, when I was little living on Orange Street, I couldn't look over that wall, and I can't look over it now. It's between 6'4" and 6'6". So the suggestion that was made to you that the siting of this structure in the setback is to preserve the view of the historic kitchen house is just not true, because you don't see it from that location. You see it from Broad Street, which has nothing to do with the application. Third criteria, and again, and that if you apply the setback, that you would unreasonably restrict the value of this property. The property is worth $7.2 million. It's operated as a hotel. As Ms. Bennett mentioned, it has approximately 10,000 square feet. It's got 2 buildings. Nothing unreasonably restricts the value of this property. It's already one of the most desirable properties on the peninsula. So the idea that they can't build the mammoth 46-foot wide garage in the setback and that they have to actually adhere to the requirements is not a hardship. That should be enforced. And lastly, that the variance would need to not have a substantial detriment on the adjacent property or to the public good. I think I can't speak as well as Mr. Alloy and the many citizens that have come to explain to you their view on it. And again, the offer to lower the height of this already gargantuan structure, again, a suburban is less than 7 feet wide. Why would you need a 46-foot wide garage unless you were trying to park more than 5 Suburbans in it? This should not be allowed in the setback. Again, that's the only decision that's before this group. But that's a decision that you should make and that you should deny this request. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Leesman. Anyone else who would like to speak in opposition to the application at 17 Orange Street? All right, Mr. Young, Mr. Hellman, you have an opportunity for rebuttal.
I just want to offer one clarification. There are actually 2 properties here. This is only with respect to 17 Orange, not with respect to the property on Broad Street. If this were one property, I believe the setback would be 3 feet. We would not be here for variance, and the property would be, or the new structure that we built about 6 feet closer than what we're talking about here now. So I just want to offer that clarification.
Mr. Hellman, before you sit down, I have a question for you. Heard from the neighboring owners about their objections to the variance. And I'm wondering how you can help me square all of the objections that I've heard from the neighbors with the issue of substantial detriment to the neighboring community.
So I think first of all, it's every step of the way, anything that we're trying to do with this property, the property in front has been met with substantial opposition for some unknown reason. It's interesting that I do a fair amount of land use work in the city, and the hardest projects that I ever deal with are the ones that we try to unwind hotels. And here we have one where we're trying to unwind a hotel. We're taking down a large staircase that one could look and be sort of voyeuristic in reverse and look in Aloy's property at 15 Orange, and that comes down. And we're literally just asking for a small little sliver. And, you know, that's it. So is it of substantial detriment? No, it's not a substantial detriment. In fact, if there were one parcel, as I mentioned, it would be substantially closer. I think there's a reason historically Charleston houses typically don't have windows on the north side, and it's for this very reason. These are where we build to, and I hope that helps answer your question.
Thank you, Mr. Hellman. All right. Does anybody else have any questions for the owner or the applicant or for the city or anybody who stood up in opposition?
There was a question about moving it further away that you asked. And was that addressed at all? How did you come about the location of where you're going to put it?
So mainly we're just working with the right angle to the kitchen building. We are considering how the property all works together, and pushing this as far back as it can go was sort of the natural way to design the buildings. Originally, there were the building at 15 Orange, the neighboring building, was part of this property. These lots were parceled out, and so push as far back on the lot as you could. This is natural.
Mr. Young, is there anything that would prevent you, other than from an aesthetic point of view, of beginning your building contiguous to, or directly parallel with this, with the line, and I guess this is the southern end of the existing structure? Is that right?
That's the southern end of the existing.
So, is there anything that would prevent you from continuing on that line and just making it parallel and building the structure that way, other than aesthetic reasons?
Yeah, I think that the main reason we're putting it there is just to start with that 9 foot and push it back. Further north, pushing it pretty
Okay. And Mr. Batchelder, if they did that, they wouldn't require variance, is that right?
That's correct.
And how high could they build that building if they don't get the variance and aren't limiting themselves to the height restriction?
Well, the property is in a 3-story height district, but of course the BAR has the final say.
BAR would have to approve the height, but otherwise it would be a 3-story building, could be a 3-story
Could
building.
be a 2-story, could be
To get
3-story.
architectural approval.
Can I make one more?
Yes, please.
Just on the siting, that we are working with the National Register property, and we're trying to preserve as much of the open spaces as possible, which is in keeping with the Secretary of Engineer standards.
Thank you. Discussion? You want to discuss anything among the Board members, any questions, thoughts?
Support your concept. I don't have a square wall in my house.
Yeah, and I suppose that it's not only a factor that would be germane to the variance test, but it's also, I think, something that's important for the neighbors to consider, that they may have the right to build a structure there if they are within the required setbacks, and there may be no control over that, even if this board denies the variance request. And I hope everybody has considered that who has stood up and made comments in opposition. The board is not charged with necessarily doing what we think is the right thing. We have to follow the requirements of the zoning ordinance, and we have to follow the requirements set forth in the hardship test. So sometimes those might be different from what we think the best result might be, but that's where we are.
I'll make a motion to deny the hardship is not denied.
All right, there's a motion to deny by Mr. McKay. Is there a second?
Second.
Richard seconds the motion. All in favor to deny the variance application, please say aye. Aye. All opposed to the motion, denying, there's none. So the variance request is denied, although I will again say, I'm not sure that this board is not doing you a disservice by denying the variance, but that's what's been done. So good night and good luck. Thank you. The next application is B4, 131 Columbus Street, Cannonboro, Elliottboro, TMS number 460-08-02-001. Zoned LIA, Light Industrial Accommodations Zone District. Request amendment under section 54-964 of the BZA-Z approval granted on August 3rd, 2021 to allow a change to relocate the loading driveway and vehicle elevator driveway from Columbus Street to Spring Street, to allow modifications to the approved architectural plans that would result in relocating parking to a subsurface level that allows an increase to the total food and beverage operation space to increase from 9,000 square feet to 15,496 square feet, to allow a rooftop bar and restaurant that is 7,446 square feet, zoned LIA, Light Industrial Accommodations Zone District. The owner is 131 Columbus NPV MCZ SPE LLC. The applicant is Nelson Mullins, Riley and Scarborough, J.S. Claypool. Mr. Batchel.
So this is a hotel that was approved back in 2021. And at that time, the application was filed on behalf of the owner of the property, the longtime owner of the property, who is not in the hotel business. And so since then, we've had a sale of the property to a developer who is in the hotel business, and they would like to revise the plans to accommodate their needs. And I think the plans have approved from the original set of plans, but they do include some changes. And I think, in my line of thinking, I think that they ought to come back through the board for your approval as an amendment to that original approval. So let me just explain the original plans and show you the changes. So here's the site. The site is currently occupied by a one-story industrial building that was converted to the alley, bar, restaurant, and amusement facility, and sits adjacent to the future low line property now owned by the city, which is the former railroad right-of-way, where all those cars are parked right here. And that will become, at some point, hopefully not too distant future, a linear park. Here's the site on the zoning map. It's zone light industrial, recognition of its original use years ago. And the application, the materials submitted by the applicant, just explaining how they meet the special exception requirements for this revised plan. I agree that they meet the special exception requirements. Revised plan, and then this is a, and they submitted a revised traffic study as well, because they're making some changes that alter the flow of traffic around the facility. And so I asked them to do that, and they did that. And this is a response from James Wallace of the city's Department of Traffic and Transportation, indicating that he's seen the study and that there's no concern on his part with the revised traffic study as it relates to impacts on residential neighborhoods. And passenger loading and unloading operations are still occurring off the right of way as they are required to be provided for a hotel of this size. So he's fine with it. This is the original plan that was approved. So Columbus Street is on the left, Spring Street on the right, and all of the guest drop-off, pickup, parking access was provided off of Columbus Street with a hotel reception area here and a restaurant on the Spring Street end of the building. And then the parking, although there were some spaces right there immediately adjacent to the guest drop-off pickup area, parking was subterranean access through these elevators right here. It would take cars down to subsurface level where they would be housed in stackers, valet parking operations. And then the meeting space was on the second and third floors. The blue area is shown here. Then rooms above. And on the very top floor, the 8th floor, there would be a small outside terrace bar area that was really more for the hotel guests and not a public facility. So that was the original approval. These are the revised plans. Again, the guest drop-off pickup area still occurs off of Columbus Street. And then you see lobby, bar, or lounge area, and then dining right here. And the low line is right here. So this has a larger presence along the low line than the previous plan. But parking is accessed by driving the car. The valet would drive the car around and access these lifts from Spring Street right here that would then take the cars down to a level below the street where they would have stackers to accommodate the parking. So not unlike the previous plan, but the access to it is from Spring Street. And that was one concern that I had, and then they've addressed that by revising their traffic study and reviewing that with the city's Department of Traffic and Transportation. Of course, the plans for the hotel still have to go through the BAR and be approved by them. So I'm sure they'll have some scrutiny over the appearance of those garages to allow them to access the vehicle lifts, but that's another matter for them. And then second floor, large meeting space on the second floor of the hotel. Then rooms, and you get to the top floor, the 8th floor, and here, instead of rooms in a small facility, it's a larger meeting space and a restaurant bar area with some outdoor areas as well. So that's a change from the original plan. And the total food and beverage square footage increases from approximately 9,000 square feet to 12,550 square feet. So that, but they're still under the maximum 12% allowed for hotel. So changes, but they're still in compliance with the requirements. So wanted to bring those to your attention for your approval. I think they're fine. They meet the requirements of the ordinance, and so my recommendation is going to be for approval of these amended plans. But again, I thought that they needed to come before the board to seek your approval. This is a cross section showing the floors and the different uses on those floors. And then very schematic elevations and perspectives of the hotel. Has not been presented to the BAR yet.
Okay.
So my recommendation for approval.
Okay, thank you, Lee. So just so I'm clear, the reason that it's coming before the board, we have granted the special exception, but it was based upon plans that have changed. And even though there are substantial changes in those plans, they still, the amended plans still meet any and all ordinances that apply to this development. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, anyone in opposition to the application for 131 Columbus? Seeing no one, Mr. Claypool, it's your turn. Anything you'd like to say?
No, the only thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, is that in terms of the rooftop, the genesis here is when the ground level changed and the entrance experience changed. That allowed some flexibility within the building that was previously approved. No increase in hotel rooms, no increase in stories, and allowed some flexibility on the 8th floor. And the exterior, 1,500 square feet, the same exterior that was approved in the original plan. So there's no increase in any sort of outdoor space. So that's it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Claypool. It's been good to see you back. Any discussion, any questions? Your motion? All right, Mr. Bennett moves to approve. Do I have a second? Mr. McKay seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes unanimously. The amendment to the special exception is granted. Thank you, Mr. Claypool.
Thank you all.
The next item on our agenda is B5 2075 Ferris and Cyrus Road, TMS number 341-00-00-082, zoned SR1, requesting a variance from section 54-301 to allow construction of a single-family residence having a 6.8-foot rear setback. 25 feet are required. The owner is Veronica Cohen. The applicant is Edward S. Scott, contractor. Mr. Batchel.
This is a residentially zoned property on James Island, and it's a large lot, but it's large in terms of its width, not depth. And so it's 98 feet deep, but 310 feet wide. So unusual there. And there's an aerial view of the lot. And they're asking for is setback variance from the rear property line to allow a 1.5-story house to be built on the lot. 6.8-foot rear setback. And I go back to this. You can see the property to the south is a wooded area. And this is the site plan showing the footprint of the house, driveway coming off the street. Those are not existing trees, those are just indicating this plan. And see the 6.8 foot setback is shown here. Plans for the house show very small half-story relative to the house. Here's the elevation of the house. So I think the large size of the lot, but the shallow depth, relatively shallow depth of the lot is a factor in variance application, and I recommend approval of this.
Thank you, Lee. Anyone here in opposition to this application? No, not in opposition. All right. Are you here? Are you Mrs. Cohen?
I am.
Okay. Anything you'd like to say to the board? I think we're probably ready to vote, but you can address the board if you like.
I just want to live there. It's my residence, so I'm from Jennifer. So thank you.
Thank you. Sorry you've had to wait this evening. All right. Any questions for Ms. Cohen? Anybody ready to make a motion?
Move.
All right, Ms. Richards moves to approve. Do I have a second? Second. Mr. Goodwin seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes unanimously, and you have received your variance. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
All right. Final item on the agenda, B6, 35 Broad Street, TMS number 458-09-03-122, zoned LB, requesting a special exception under section 54-110 to allow an expansion to a non-conforming duplex use with a third floor addition at the rear of the building. The owner is 35 Broad Street, LLC. The applicant is Rhett Morgan Architect, LLC. Mr. Batchelder.
35 Broad Street is a commercially zoned property in Broad, just east of Church. It has a building that occupies the entire property. And here's an aerial view. 35 is the building in the middle, and 3.5 stories on Broad Street, but then a 2-story section in the back off of the original building. And it's on the back side of the property back here where they're proposing an addition, a vertical addition that will increase the total size, the total condition area of the living space in these residential units. And it's that enlargement of that conditioned living space that is before you tonight, because the 2 units on this property are legal non-conforming use. Property is not large enough to support 2 units by right, so that those 2 units have been there for a number of years, and the plans that they submitted, you'll see how they propose to renovate the interior spaces and build this addition. So here's a view of that existing rooftop area back here, and a view of the back portion of the property from Elliott Street to the south. Views. Let's skip right to this. So this is existing floor plans on the left and proposed on the right. Not any real change that we're concerned about on the ground floor. Second floor, revising the floor plans and updating spaces, putting in a nice larger kitchen, improving access, all those kind of things are happening. The third floor, you see changes, more significant changes. Green indicates 1 unit. Blue, which is the entire second floor, indicates the other unit. And it's this other unit that has stairs in the back that will take you up to this new addition back here. So this is the addition they're proposing that enlarges the conditioned living space. So they're going from 3,795 square feet of conditioned living space in these units, these residential units, to 4,095 square feet additional living space. And if my assessment is correct, they're actually decreasing the number of bedrooms from 6 bedrooms to 5 bedrooms. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that's the way I see the plans. And then, of course, there's an existing half-story on the front building along Broad Street that remains. And then in elevation, right is the proposed, left is existing. So storefront will be restored. And this is the existing east elevation and the proposed. So this is the addition that they're proposing on the back portion of the building. And more views. This is from Elliott Street. So existing over here, and this is the proposed addition here. View west. So that's the request that's before you. And streetscape from Elliott Street. And there's the only issue is that expansion of the conditioned living space in these non-conforming units. And my recommendation is for approval. The special exception test deals with light and air impacts on certain types of additions, but in this case it would be impacts on parking and other considerations, but I don't think this would have any material impact on those factors. So my recommendation is for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelder. Anyone here to oppose the application at 35 Broad Street? Seeing none. So you're the owner or the applicant or both?
Good evening. My name is Brett Morgan. I'm the applicant. I know you guys have been here for a while, so I'll try to do this real quickly so you can have your family. Yeah, so the front portion of the structure is a 1700s historic, really just a gem of a property. And so my clients are undergoing the restoration and preservation of it. And part of this, we're actually opening up this area to the rear so that we can recapture some of the original openings and create this exterior courtyard, if you will. And so we're losing a little bit of space there, so trying to regain some of that space with this addition and really give priority to the historic structure. And I don't really know that there's much more to add than that. It's pretty straightforward.
I don't think so.
Any questions?
Nope. I don't. Well, Mr. Bennett may, Mr. McKay may. I don't want to speak for anybody else. Somebody might have a question for you. No questions. Apparently you had us at hello, I'm Mr. Morgan. Anybody want to make a motion? Mr. McKay moves to approve. Do I have a second? Mr. Bennett seconds the motion. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None are opposed. The motion passes unanimously and the special exception is granted. Thank you. Conclude our meeting. Thank you.